Tables taken. She hadn't even reached for a chair. Lydia Marsh stood at the entrance of Clarendon's, the kind of restaurant where the lighting cost more per fixture than most people's monthly rent, and she looked, by every visible measure, like she'd taken a wrong turn. Her coat was navy wool, slightly worn at the left cuff. Her bag was canvas, not leather. Her hair was pulled back in the kind of way that said she'd been working since 6 in the morning and hadn't thought about it since. The host, a young man named Trevor whose name tag was polished and whose smile was surgically precise, looked at her the way people look at a stray that has wandered into a garden party. "Do you have a reservation?" he asked, and the question was really a different question entirely. Lydia said, "Marsh, 7 o'clock." Trevor's eyes dropped to his screen. His finger moved slowly, then stopped. "I'm sorry," he said, "not sorry at all. I don't see anything under that name. Try Marsh Calloway." He looked again. His face did something complicated. Yes, I see it. Party of 1? Party of 4, Lydia said. "My husband is running late. My sister and her husband are parking. I'll be seated now." Trevor's smile recalibrated. "Of course, right this way." He led her to a table near the kitchen. Not in the kitchen, but close enough that she could hear every plate that landed and every word the line cooks said when they thought no one was listening. It was the kind of table restaurants reserved for people they wanted to accommodate without wanting to actually see. Lydia sat down without comment. She unfolded her napkin and placed it across her lap and looked at the bread basket that wasn't there yet, because no one had brought it, because no one had come to the table at all in the 7 minutes since she'd been seated. She watched the room. A couple 2 tables over had been greeted within 60 seconds of sitting. A man in a gray suit across the room had a full glass of water and an amuse-bouche he hadn't asked for. A woman in a fur-trimmed jacket near the window was being shown the evening specials by the head sommelier personally. Lydia noted all of this the way she'd been noting things her entire adult life, quietly, without expression, the way you learn to do when the world has spent years telling you that your observations are inconvenient. A server appeared, eventually. Young woman, frazzled at the edges, clearly assigned to this section as either punishment or oversight. "Her name tag," said Becca. "Can I start you with some water?" Becca asked. "Water would be wonderful," Lydia said, "and I'd love to see the wine list when you have a moment." "Sure. Are you waiting for someone?" "Yes. But I can look at the menu in the meantime." Becca nodded and disappeared. She came back with water. She did not bring the wine list. She did not bring bread. She did not return for 11 more minutes. By that point, Lydia's sister Claudine had arrived. Claudine, who was tall and wore things that made people look at her when she entered rooms, who had their father's eyes and their mother's refusal to apologize for taking up space. Her husband, a gentleman named Pete, who built furniture and had arms like he'd built a lot of it, was right behind her. "It's cold in here," Claudine said, kissing Lydia's cheek, and then looking around the restaurant with the particular expression she reserved for places that deserved to be evaluated. "Why are we so close to the kitchen?" "We're fine," Lydia said. "We are not fine. We're sitting in the exhaust fan." Pete said nothing, but pulled out his chair and sat and looked at Lydia in the way he always looked at her, which was with a kind of steady, uncomplicated affection that had never once wavered in the 20 years she'd known him. "Marcus coming?" he texted, Lydia said. 20 minutes. He's always 20 minutes. He's always 20 minutes from wherever he is when he texts." Pete smiled. Claudine flagged down a passing server. Not Becca, someone else, a man who clearly didn't belong to their section, and asked for the wine list and was told she'd have to wait for their server. "Who's our server?" Claudine asked. "Becca," Lydia said. They waited. Becca came back. She had forgotten about the wine list. Claudine asked again pleasantly. Becca went to get it. A different table, seated after them, 3 white women in blazers who had been warmly greeted by Trevor himself, received their bread, their water, and a server who crouched down beside the table with a smile and said something that made them all laugh. Claudine watched this. Then she looked at Lydia. "Don't," Lydia said. "I haven't said anything. You're about to. I'm just noting the bread situation." "I know, I noticed it too." Pete said quietly. "How long have you been here?" "About 25 minutes before us." "Yes." He looked at the other table. He looked at their table. He said nothing else, because there was nothing else that needed to be said. The wine list arrived. They ordered. The wine came back wrong. not the vintage they'd asked for, the one below it, which the server explained by saying the kitchen was running low on the selection they'd requested, which was an explanation that was technically possible and also felt, given everything, like something else entirely. Claudine opened her mouth. Lydia put her hand on her sister's wrist. "It's fine," Lydia said. "Lydia, it's fine." Marcus arrived at the 40-minute mark. Marcus Calloway, who was Lydia's husband, and who arrived the way he always arrived, which was without apology and without performance. A large man in a dark coat, who shook Pete's hand and kissed his wife's cheek, and settled into the remaining chair like he was settling into his own living room. He had the kind of face that made people unsure whether to trust him completely or be a little afraid of him, and in Lydia's experience, that ambiguity had served him extraordinarily well in boardrooms, and it served him now. He looked at the table. He looked at the bread situation. He looked at the wine. "Tell me," he said. "We've been here almost an hour," Claudine said. "They seated us next to the kitchen. They forgot our bread. They switched the wine without asking. Table near the window got here 20 minutes after us," Pete said. "Full service." Marcus looked at his wife. "I don't want to make a thing," Lydia said. "You never want to make a thing, because making a thing is exhausting. Not making a thing is also exhausting," Claudine said. Marcus flagged down Becca. He did it with the particular efficiency of a man who was accustomed to being flagged at. Becca came over and Marcus said pleasantly, "We'd like the bread service, and we'd like the wine we actually ordered, and I'd like to speak with the manager when you get a chance." Becca's expression did several things in rapid succession. "The manager, when you get a chance," Marcus repeated. No rush. The manager who came was not the general manager. He was an assistant something. Lydia couldn't tell from the title he introduced himself with, because he introduced himself in the way of people who are hoping their arrival alone will resolve the situation. His name was Derek Foss, according to his name tag. He had the energy of someone who had been told to go handle something and had gone to handle it with minimal actual intention to change anything. "I understand there's been some concern about the service this evening," Derek said. "Not concern," Marcus said. "Observation. My wife has been here for almost an hour. Our table is adjacent to the kitchen. The bread never came. The wine was substituted without our knowledge. Meanwhile, I can point to at least 2 tables that received significantly more attentive service, both of which were seated after my wife arrived." Derek Foss smiled the smile of someone weathering a storm they believe will pass. "I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience. Our servers are quite busy tonight, and sometimes busy is not the question," Marcus said. "The question is why those tables aren't busy. I'm sure it was just an oversight. My wife has been sitting here for an hour," Claudine said, and her voice had gone to a place that Lydia recognized, a place their mother's voice used to go, the place just before the thing that couldn't be taken back. She was seated by the kitchen. She waited. Twice she asked for the wine list. Nobody brought bread. "And the table over there," she pointed, "has had 3 servers and a sommelier." Derek Fossey's eyes moved very briefly, involuntarily, to Lydia, just for a second. And in that second, something passed across his face that was not professional, and not apologetic, and not any of the things a manager is supposed to be. Lydia saw it. She had seen that look her entire life, in waiting rooms and boardrooms and restaurants not unlike this one. The look that assessed and dismissed, that calculated and concluded, that decided in the space of a glance what a person was worth and what they were owed. She had spent 30 years watching people perform that calculation and getting it wrong. She folded her napkin and placed it on the table. "I'm going to make a call," she said, to no one in particular. Claudine looked at her. "Lydia, I'll be outside for just a moment." She picked up her canvas bag and she walked through the dining room, past the bread that wasn't hers, and the wine that wasn't right, and the table by the window with the sommelier and the women in blazers, and she pushed through the front door of Clarendon's into the cold November air. She stood on the sidewalk and she made a call. The person who answered picked up on the second ring, the way they always did, the way she'd come to expect from someone whose entire job depended on things being done exactly right. "Hey," she said, "it's me. I need you to pull the Clarendon group file." A pause. "The whole portfolio? The whole thing?" Another pause. That's 4 properties, Lydia. I know how many properties it is. Pull the file." The line was quiet for a moment. Then, "Done. What do you need?" Send me the contact for the managing partner. Sending now." She hung up and stood in the cold and looked at the street, at the way the light moved on wet pavement, at the particular quality of quiet that exists in cities at 7:30 on a weeknight when the dinner rush hasn't peaked yet and the bars haven't filled. She breathed. She thought about her father, who used to say that the most important thing a person could do was refuse to become the thing that hurt them, who used to say that dignity was not something anyone could give you, who used to sit at the head of their family's kitchen table, in the house he'd built with his own hands in a neighborhood people told him was not for people like him, and say, "You walk in, you stay in, you don't flinch." She had never flinched. She went back inside. Derek Foss was still at the table, still weathering, still performing the specific theater of apology that involves a great deal of expression and very little action. He looked up when Lydia returned. His expression was one of mild relief, the kind a person feels when they think the difficult one has decided to leave. Lydia sat down. She placed her bag on her lap. She looked at Derek Foss, and she said, "Mr. Foss, are you familiar with Aldercroft Capital?" He blinked. "I'm sorry? Aldercroft Capital, the investment group." He blinked again. Yes, of course. They're the primary institutional backer of the Clarendon Group," Lydia said, "which owns this restaurant, and the 3 other locations, and the hotel property on Whitmore, and a partial stake in the development on East Garrison." She let the silence sit for just a moment. "I've been chair of Aldercroft's investment committee for the last 11 years. Derek Fossey's face underwent a transformation that Lydia had witnessed before, in other rooms, with other people, that she had never quite gotten used to and had never quite stopped finding clarifying. The performance fell away first, then the smile, then something underneath both of them, the calculation, the reassessment, the frantic arithmetic. "Mrs. Dr. Marsh Calloway," Lydia said, "though at this point I think we've moved past formality." Claudine was not looking at Lydia. She was looking at the ceiling, the way she did when she was fighting something. Pete was looking at his hands. Marcus was looking at Derek Foss with the peaceful expression of a man who has seen this before and is patient enough to let it complete itself. "Dr. Marsh Calloway," Derek said, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for the experience you've had this evening. I can assure you that this is absolutely not the standard of—" "I know it's not the standard," Lydia said. "I've been coming to this restaurant for 4 years. I've brought clients here. I brought my father-in-law here for his 75th birthday. The service was exceptional. Tonight was not exceptional, and I think you and I both understand why tonight was different." Derek opened his mouth. "I'm not asking you to admit anything," Lydia said, and her voice was level, completely level, the voice she used in board meetings when she needed the room to know that she was not confused, and she was not emotional, and she was not going to sit down. "I'm going to finish dinner with my family. And tomorrow I'm going to have a conversation with my partners about Aldercroft's continued relationship with the Clarendon Group. That conversation may or may not have anything to do with tonight. I haven't decided yet." She looked at him. "But I want you to understand," she said, "that it might." Derek Fossey said something after that. He said several things. He called the general manager over, the actual general manager, a woman named Rosalind, who arrived looking like someone who had just been handed a situation she would have preferred not to inherit. Rosalind apologized more sincerely than Derek had managed, and with the specific efficiency of someone who understood what was at stake, because Rosalind, it became clear, was aware of Aldercroft Capital in a way that Derek was not. The bread arrived. The correct wine arrived. A different table was offered, the best table in the room, the one by the window that Lydia declined because she did not want the table by the window anymore. She wanted to finish her dinner and go home. They did. The food was good. The wine, the right wine, was better. Claudine told a story about a client at her firm that had Lydia laughing hard enough that people turned to look. And Pete ordered dessert for the table without asking anyone, because he always knew what everyone wanted, and was always right about it. And Marcus sat across from his wife and watched her the way he had always watched her, with a quietness that was not passivity but its opposite, a stillness that came from knowing exactly what he was looking at. At the end of the night, when the bill came, comped, the entire thing, a gesture Lydia noted and did not comment on. Marcus helped Lydia into her coat in the restaurant's foyer. "You didn't have to wait that long," he said. I know. You could have said something earlier. I know that too. So why didn't you? Lydia looked at the restaurant around her, at the tables and the light and the bread baskets and the sommeliers and the careful, orchestrated warmth that some people received automatically and others had to construct through circumstance or leverage or force of will. Because I wanted to see how long it would take, she said. I wanted to know what it would look like. I wanted the whole picture. Marcus looked at her. And, he said, and it looked exactly like I expected it to. They walked out into the cold together. On the sidewalk, Claudine pulled Lydia into a hug that lasted longer than usual. The Aldercroft thing, Claudine said, against her sister's shoulder. Was that real? Every word. And tomorrow? The conversation with your partners? Lydia thought about this, about Derek Foss's face, about the look in the moment before he knew, about the table by the kitchen and the bread that never came, and the 40 minutes before the wine, and the precise, practiced arithmetic of who deserved what in that room. She thought about what her father used to say. You don't flinch. I don't know yet, she said, but he doesn't know that. She pulled back and looked at her sister and smiled. And that, she said, is the whole point. There's a reason this story matters. Not because Lydia Marsh Calloway is extraordinary, though she is, but because the moment she walked into that restaurant in her navy wool coat with her canvas bag, before she said a single word, a decision had already been made about her. A calculation had already been run, and the people running it were so confident in their answer that they never once considered they might be wrong. That's not a story about one restaurant. That's not a story about one night. We've all sat at that table by the kitchen. Most of us didn't have an Aldercroft file to pull. Most of us couldn't make a call that changed the temperature of the room. And the question that stays with me, the question I want to leave with you, is this. What happens to everyone who sat there before Lydia? What happens to the ones who didn't have the leverage, who had every right to that bread, that wine, that basic human courtesy, and left without it because no one came to the table? The system didn't fail that night because Derek Foss was one bad manager. It failed because he was confident, because he was comfortable, because nothing in his experience had ever cost him anything for being wrong about someone until it did. If this story hits something in you, if you've been that person, or you've watched that person, or you've been in that room and known exactly what you were looking at, let me know in the comments. Tell me what you saw. Tell me what you did. And if you're new here, this is what we do at Velvet Reckoning. We find the stories that live in the spaces between what people say and what they mean. The stories that happen when someone decides, without any evidence, what another person is worth. Like this video if Lydia's patience hit different than you expected. Share it with someone who's ever been sat by the kitchen. And subscribe, because we're just getting started. The bread always comes eventually. The question is who had to fight for it.